Hi there everyone, Lars here, returning to my Krusie theory once again, but this time with some Halloween spice. Far more tooth-rotting sweetness and flavorful than pumpkin spice. All brought to you by Camille's Harem, not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. In this video, I want to examine what Toby's recent lore drops and chapter updates have revealed about Kris and Susie's relationship, and given what has been confirmed, we can theorize a little bit about what we might see happen to Kris and Susie and their growing friendship in Chapter 3. Now, it's important to say at the beginning that while this video is pro-Krusie and will explore the details and evidence of this potential romance in Deltarune, this is not meant to be ammunition for the current shipping war. When I did my last Krusie analysis, the community was relatively shipping war-free, but things have gotten hairy since then. Here at Camille's Harem, we follow the 10 commandments of shipping. All ships are trash until proven otherwise. So if you bring the shipping war to the comment section, just remember that you're in the same dumpster as the rest of us. So let's be polite, trash pandas, and enjoy whatever pairing you love. So with that warning out of the way, let's quickly review what we know about Kris and Susie's relationship and then get into the awesome stuff that Toby Fox has revealed about Kris and Susie. For far deeper dives into their relationship and what's become of their friendship and potential romance, please check out my first 2 theory videos and analyses on them. But to make sure that we're all on the same footing here for this video, let's hit at least the major highlights from the first 2 chapters of Deltarune. Starting off, Kris and Susie had a very antagonistic relationship at the start of Chapter 1. Susie was the school bully and beat up Kris as they went to get chalk and even threatened to bite off Kris's face. In the dark world, Susie belittled and abused Kris, actively going against them and Ralsei whenever they tried to lead Susie and help her out. However, despite all these issues, if you play through the dialogue options, we quickly discover that Kris has been keeping an eye on Susie for a while and seems to understand her a little bit better than probably anyone else in their classroom. For example, in the fight against Lancer, Kris puts Susie off balance with compliments, offering her worms and so forth. After defeating Lancer and Susie, they both join Kris's party and go to King's Castle. However, everyone gets captured and is imprisoned. But in prison, Susie manages to work on her own. She confronts Lancer and learns to act for herself in a positive way. On her own, Susie decides to stop teasing Ralsei so much and even asks Kris to help her become a team player. The first chapter continues all the way up to the battle with King, where the final boss tricks Ralsei into healing him and then pulls the rug out from under the heroes. But as King goes for the killing blow against Susie, Kris breaks the player's control and intercepts the attack. Susie then rescues Kris from King. And I'm just going to say right here that given the lore dump that we got, this scene is even more poignant than we previously thought. But moving on. After the battle against King, the teens return to the light world, where they share a touching parting moment. Susie gets really excited about returning to the dark world and just can't wait to go back with Kris. At first, she really just wants this to be something between her and Kris, even deflecting Noelle's probing to find out what is going on between them. But when they are banished from Ralsei's kingdom to complete their project, the 2 new friends discover another dark world in the hometown library. While Chapter 2 has a lot of flustered Noelle and a big moment between her and Susie, there are tons of Krusie moments sprinkled throughout the chapter. We learn that Susie is a tsundere and really sucks at flirting. Nevertheless, she tries to flirt with Kris, and they even share moss with her. And in Queen's prison cell, Susie tries to flirt with Kris in a really hilarious way. Susie is also the only one that we see who can cheer up Kris after the pacifist Neo-Spamton fight. She also brings up how nicely Kris smells of apples, which will become more important here in a moment. Kris also has a very suspect/romantic reaction to Susie's tea, and at the end of the game, the player can choose to have Kris ask Susie to the town fair, which in the context of Susie's many responses reveals that Kris is pleased with this particular choice, should the player do it. But overall, across the 2 chapters that have so far been released for Deltarune, the trajectory for Kris and Susie has clearly been from enemies to friends. The bully and bullied have made up. Hometown's 2 oddballs have joined forces, and we see Susie and Kris getting to know each other better and strengthening their fledgling friendship. Whether or not these 2 become a couple it's clear that a strong friendship is underway. There you have it. A very, very brief rundown of the obvious facts. If you want to dive deeper into them and their full context, check out my earlier Krusie videos. But now, let's talk about what Toby Fox has shared with us. In a few postings, he revealed blog posts from Noelle telling stories of her past with Kris and an altercation she witnessed between Susie and Kris. Toby also gave us a few screenshots of moments with Kris and Susie later in the game from chapters 3, 4, and 5. So first, let's have a look at the blog post from Noelle. We'll listen to it and then break it down.
So this new girl that I keep talking about, she really hates Kris. And you know what's weird? Literally, only Kris seems oblivious to this. Or no, are they oblivious? They're literally getting bullied. Did they just not care? Then again, who knows what Kris is thinking? I just don't get why they don't tell their mom. Or better, switch seats with me, like I keep saying. Lol. I guess they just don't want to be at the front of the class. But she doesn't ever bully me, even when there'd be a huge opportunity to do so. Come on, switch seats. Everyone would be safer that way. Like, you're not gonna believe what happened today. LOL. After the bell rang as usual, everyone rushed to see who could get out of class first. I stayed behind a bit to help Alfie's put away some books and looked for some mysterious missing supplies. Meanwhile, Kris was still asleep, face down on a totally blank notebook page, and for some reason, Susie hadn't left either. She was just sitting there, staring at Kris's head, sniffing it. I wonder if she likes scented candles. Eventually, I started to leave too. I even almost said bye this time, but I was a bit more worried about Kris, so I stayed outside the classroom to, watch? I had to stay totally out of sight, holiday family ninja style, since Susie didn't seem like she was going to do anything until she made sure I was gone. After a while, Susie got up, knocking her chair over. She jumped into Miss Alfie's seat and put her shoes up on the desk, getting dirt everywhere. I just know I'm going to have to clean that. She grabbed the apple Birdley had given Alfie's a few days ago. You know, one of the ones she has literally never eaten. Held it up and started talking. Hey, idiot. Kris didn't look up. Hey, idiot! Kris still didn't look up. Kris! Kris looked up. Susie rolled her eyes and showed her all her horrible and very cool teeth. Nice shampoo. Apple flavor, right? Better be careful wearing that around me. Then she bit the whole apple in half, including the core. She even ate the seeds, which, contain arsenic, if you didn't know. Don't eat those, Susie. Anyway, Kris didn't react, so she continued. Keep smelling like apples, you might end up like this. Kris didn't react. Bitten. She pointed at the apple. In half. There was like the most awkward silence and then snickering. It wasn't Susie. No, it was Kris. Just barely stifling some laugh. Did they think that was some kind of a weird joke? Whatever it was, Susie must have thought she was getting made fun of because she immediately just launched the apple right at Kris. But Kris, with their gamer reaction speed, held up their notebook just like a shield and blocked it diagonally, bouncing it up into the air, and actually caught the apple. Then took a bite out of it. Gosh, though, did that make Susie mad? You little. She ran over and grabbed Kris by the hair, staring into their face, really close. I froze. I knew that if I didn't do anything, Kris would get hurt, or worse. But something inside me just froze. I just stood there, holding my breath, and Susie kept talking. One day, your mom's gonna get sick of you, you little freak. And as soon as that happens, Susie laughed. I felt genuinely sick. Someone might just make you disappear, and she'll finally realize how happy she was without you. But after that, Kris didn't say anything at all. Susie exploded. Say something, you idiot! It felt like her voice echoed around the room forever. Then when it finally went quiet, Kris's mouth looked like it moved. To be honest, moved so slightly, I couldn't even tell if they said something or what, but whatever it was, Susie's attitude suddenly completely changed. She let go of Kris, backing off quickly, then left the room in such a hurry she easily could have won today's leaving the class first race. I really wish I could have seen her reaction, but I was so scared that she would see me that I literally just jumped into my locker. In the end, all I could see through the little slats was her shape from behind, going towards the entrance of the school with her head held low. Finally, I heard the entrance door close. I sighed, and suddenly that frozen feeling that had built up in my chest flew out of my body all at once. Holy cheese and crackers, I said to myself. I almost started laughing from relief. Then suddenly my locker's door flung open. Kris was standing there. I started to stutter hello, and they just started slowly shut the door on me and left. Well, that just happened. LOL, hee hee. I ordered apple shampoo. Maybe if I wear it too, she won't bother Kris as much.
Now, there's a lot going on in this short tale from Noelle. First, we should acknowledge that this account comes from an unreliable narrator. Noelle's understanding of events is colored by her emotional distance from Kris, and her massive crush on Susie, and the fact that she only got part of the story. What this means then is that there is a lot of wiggle room for plausibility and deniability for all kinds of interpretations based on what Noelle wrote. But what she did share, and what she then locked from everyone else, is still very valuable, despite the fact that this is a story told from an unreliable narrator. For one thing, Noelle confirms my previous observation that both she and Kris have been watching Susie for some time now. However, Miss Holiday gives us a better understanding as to the overall timeline because Susie is a newcomer to hometown. So really, neither teen actually understands Susie before the start of chapter 1. We're also enlightened as to just how bad the bullying was. Susie was absolutely targeting Kris. However, the situation is complicated. Kris didn't just take the bullying, but even turned it to their advantage, deflecting the apple, taking a bite out of it, which is an indirect kiss, wink wink, and then turning the tables on Susie with their laughter and unheard response to her taunts clearly indicate that Kris took complete control of the situation away from Susie. This then throws into sharper relief some of the events in chapter 1. When Susie bullies Kris, slamming them into the locker and threatening to bite off their face in payback for how Kris countered her bullying earlier, that's pretty much what we're seeing right here. She is getting back at Kris for that whole apple moment. She also does her best not to listen to Kris for the first half of chapter 1, which changes during the fight between Kris and Ralsei against her and Lancer. If you play through all of the dialogue options, Kris does a good job of putting Susie off balance until she completely shuts them out, forcing the player to focus on defeating Lancer instead. And there we now see a correlation between these different scenes. Susie, well, she's used, apparently, to Kris completely turning the tables on her, and so she doesn't want to listen to Kris because Kris, with just a few mumbled words, can really put her on the back foot. Now, given all of this, it is reasonable to ask how any good romantic relationship could come from this whole nasty situation. There are two things that we need to consider here. First, and most apparent, Susie learns how to be a friend in chapter 1, and when Kris breaks the player's control to save her from King, it becomes clear to her, and it should be even clearer to us, that Kris cares about her. Even though they have had a very sordid past, it hasn't been very good due to all the bullying, Kris is still leaving the door open to Susie. Kris still cares about Susie. So that should be very apparent. But secondly, and far more murkier to positively ascertain, is what Kris whispered to Susie in this moment that Noelle witnessed. While many fans think that Kris had some sick burn or comeback given Susie's shocked and haunted reaction, rather than snapping back at Kris like she does multiple times in the game, I think that Kris said something profound to her. Now, we can only guess what they said, but given the context of Susie saying that Toriel would be happier alone, and that she didn't go through with biting off Kris's face in retaliation later on, this is what I believe Kris might have said in reply to Susie when she says, "Someone might make you disappear," and she, meaning Toriel, will finally realize how happy she was without you. I think that Kris replied, "Then you'll be alone." Something along the line of that simple statement would highlight to Susie that she's an outsider, something Kris knows she hates. Susie's actions and dialogue throughout Deltarune indicate that she secretly wants to be accepted and loved. Kris is willing to be her friend. Even after all of her bullying, they still leave the door of that possibility open to her. That simple statement doesn't try to contradict the horrible taunt, but says that Susie will still be alone if Kris is gone. And that would help explain then why Susie sticks to Kris in the Dark World for a time, even though they don't get along, and why she makes an excuse regarding Toriel when we now know that Susie hardly knows Mama Goat at all. It even puts into better context Susie's reaction to Noelle lending her a pencil. It all comes down to the fact that Susie doesn't want to be alone. But then again, that is just one of infinite possibilities and interpretations to the scene. Tell me what you think Kris might have said to Susie in the comments. It also needs to be said that Susie's comment about wanting to bite into Kris because they smell like apples becomes a very interesting phrase in Chapter 2, given what we've now read. Susie uses that whole comment about biting them in half when she's bullying Kris, and later she uses it just to tease them. I'd say that when Susie first bullied Kris, that there's a real possibility that what Noelle witnessed was Susie trying to connect with Kris, but not necessarily in a friendly way. It's like a bully trying to force someone to be a friend, but being awful at it. I say this because Susie recycles the comment later on as a friend, and she's not ashamed about it. That would indicate that Susie didn't 100% mean anything negative by the comment that Kris smells like apples and that she would like to bite into them. Instead, it is Kris's reaction to it originally that enrages Susie because she loses control of the situation. As a bully, losing control causes them to violently lash out or to run away, both of which Susie does in this altercation that Noelle witnessed. However, when Susie and Kris become friends, the whole apples thing becomes more of an inside joke between the two of them. The fact that apple is a password in cyberworld, where everything we see is indicative of a double or secretive meaning for someone else, could mean that apples is now an endearing clue towards a Krusie ending. In any case, Noelle's recounting of the standoff between Kris and Susie really puts a lot into context and really highlights the transformation of their relationship. It also underscores that there's stuff to resolve between the two of them, and we'll see how both Kris and Susie handle this in the upcoming chapters. And an interesting note to make here as well is what would appear from Noelle's story of Kris becoming more withdrawn, and then this confrontation with Susie can better place the timeline of events regarding Gaster's overall experiment. I've seen a lot of people suggesting that the player already had control of Kris during this confrontation, but we certainly didn't. Otherwise, we would have been playing through it. No, the experiment was not in full swing until Chapter 1 began. We need to also note that we get plenty of reminiscing from other characters that tell us that Kris is very capable on their own. This actually disproves an earlier claim of mine that Kris was drawn to Susie because she inspired them to break free from the player's control. While I think that Susie is a great comfort to Kris now, and her friendship probably inspires them to rebel against us the players, like using the Spamton questline in an attempt to rid themselves of our influence, for example, rebellion against Gaster and the player is likely not what first drew Kris to Susie. So what did? And how does any of this tie into what we might expect in Chapter 3? This is where the pictures Toby shared with us now come into play. And for me, I think it really starts with the image of Kris and Susie at the end of Chapter 4 in Krusie's diner. Why do I say this? And why I say it's at the end of Chapter 4? Because Susie will not enter the diner because she and Caddy cannot stand each other. A friendship or understanding between Susie and Caddy therefore has been established at the time that we see this picture of Susie and Kris sitting together at a table in the diner. But Susie is commenting on Kris's family in that image. So, well, what the heck is going on here? Well, Kris and Susie will be exploring the Dreamer's backstory in Chapter 3. Through the television, which was once a family pastime for Kris and their folks, the teens will revisit the old shows that captured the changing nature of the family and their relationships. Now, I have no idea what kinds of shows will take center stage, but it looks like we've got some Great Monster Bake Off going on, and possibly The Godfather, Mobster's Pizza and Music, what a great recipe, and we might even get a horror story or something Godzilla or Susiezilla related. But with the front door open and the police summoned to the house, this is what I foresee happening. Undyne, being buddy-buddy with Asgore, lets him know that something is up at his old house. He goes to investigate and goes through the front door, falling into this third and newest dark world. Kris and Susie will reunite with Ralsei and have to find and help Toriel come to grips with everything that's happening, and she'll likely think it's all just a dream, just like Noelle did. As for Asgore, he'll have a similar experience to Birdley, wanting to use this world to reconnect with his wife and kids, and likely serving as a soft antagonist. Expect a lot of truth bombs to get dropped in this upcoming chapter. It will likely be an emotional roller coaster ride. And while we have no confirmation of this happening, I really hope that How to Draw Dragons makes a reappearance. Susie's reaction would be priceless when she sees this old book, and we might just see something come from Kris as well, because that could be seriously embarrassing. Chapter 3 will not resolve the issues within the Dreamer family, however, but it will finally dredge them to the light to be addressed throughout the rest of the game. This comes from Susie's comment that Kris's family is really weird. So much like Noelle's evolving character, the Dreamer family will be working out its many problems in preparation for Asriel's return. This upcoming chapter will also contain a lot of potential for more Krusie moments, because something so personal about Kris will be exposed to Susie. We have already seen her trying to act tactfully around her new friend and their family situation. Chapter 3 will probably open up all kinds of dialogue moments. Susie will probably also have some time alone with Toriel, and she'll learn a lot more about Kris. Now, this will likely not be a romance-heavy chapter, like all of the crushing that we got from Noelle back in Chapter 2. Instead, this will be a dramatic turning point for the better in the friendship between Kris and Susie, potentially setting up a graduation for both characters from awkward flirting on the game's periphery to more genuine moments of closeness. Remember, Susie's softest expressions have been saved just for Kris, so keep an eye out for that as we progress through the game, because that expression has been a key element to transformative moments between the two teens. Now, in Chapter 4, we will help Kris and Susie forge new friendships with Caddy and Jockington. This will lead to a reconciliation, and Susie will finally feel free to enter QCs with Kris, and then share their favorite table. While we have little to go off of to predict the events of Chapters 3 and 4, what Toby has revealed and put into context by Noelle's stories, and the events of Chapters 1 and 2, all of this tells us that at the very least, Kris and Susie's friendship will grow much, much stronger, and hopefully far healthier too. It has to be, in order to redeem them of the bullying that happened before Chapter 1. Now, that's what I can all confidently predict, and I'm not going to go into the realms of wild speculation because I'm tired of people saying that my theories and analyses are aging like milk. Well, so far my insights have done pretty well, and that's because I try to ground any theories and analyses in what can be backed up with observational data and embellished with reasonable guesswork. But believe you me, I could whisk you all away for some fun fanfiction ideas, and actually I have a great Halloween fanfic for Krusie that you can check out via a link in the description. But anyway, I feel like some people are probably disappointed right now that I'm not revealing a grand twist or moment that will cement Krusie as the true canon couple of Deltarune. Well, as per the 10 Commandments of shipping, a good ship is about developing the characters. Given what we know now, Kris and Susie really need a solid friendship to build a realistic romance on. Compare this for a brief moment to Birdley's shallow crush because he now sees Susie as a fellow gamer, and Noelle is drawn to Susie because she's so similar to her sister Des. One crush is superficial at best, and the other crush is based purely on perception. Birdley hardly stands a chance, while Noelle and Susie could genuinely fall for each other if they get to know one another better and learn honesty between themselves. Whereas, if you play through all the options in the game, especially the ones that point to Kris and Susie getting closer, the two teens are learning a lot about each other. They are teaching one another. Susie can have honest and open conversations with Kris, and we know that Kris really wants these interactions. To be fair though, Susie is the blunt anime protagonist in this game. She's building a harem, and there will probably be numerous romantic endings where she ends up either with no one, keeps her harem, or gets together with one of her classmates. Ah, classic harem nonsense. But Krusie is the slow burn romance option, a true story of enemies to lovers done right by first helping them to become best friends. So, to my fellow Krusie shippers, don't give up the faith. This story option is one that plays out in the background. All of the evidence is largely hidden as breadcrumbs or paired off with other options that are far louder. As a result, a lot of the clues and indicators of a slowly evolving romance are often overlooked by all the other people playing playing Deltarune, but they are there. As the slow burn romance option, it is likely the one that will have the greatest payoff, because Krusie then entails, well, us the player controlling Kris when Kris obviously has their own goals, and one of those goals without a doubt now is to get closer to Susie. So it ties in with even some of the bigger overall themes within this game. And that brings me back to my question that I posed a little while back about what draws Kris to Susie. What's the answer? How did the slow burn romance begin? Simple. Susie reminds Kris of a sexy dragon they grew up with, and they want to get to know this new sexy dragon. And Susie has proven to be exactly what Kris needs, a sexy dragon. And likewise, friendship with Kris is exactly what Susie has needed all this time. And that is what's bringing them together. There you have it. Krusie is indeed a viable ship along with all the others in the dumpster, and I've been enjoying it and analyzing this relationship because I love seeing how romance can be used to elevate and better characters in complex and healthy ways. I'm really excited to see what chapters 3, 4, and 5 are going to bring us, but in the meantime, while we wait, please check out our other Deltarune videos here on YouTube. And if you're a writer looking for more concrete writing advice and insights, please head on over to our podcast, Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We have writing exercises over on our Pinterest page, and we would love for you to join our growing community of novice authors. Links for all that and more are in the description below. And until the next video, y'all, keep on shipping Krusie and juice.